This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls. This week, Aaron Newcomb and I talked to Andre Kudra about SSI self-sovereign identity and the demoscene, which, if you haven't heard of it, is more interesting than you know, and that is coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 628, recorded Wednesday, May 5th, 2021, Digital Sovereignty. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Technology Powers X. Learn how technology is reshaping business through an original podcast from Dell Technologies. Search for Technology Powers X anywhere you listen to podcasts and download each episode today. And by Command Line Heroes, a podcast that tells the epic true tales of developers, programmers, hackers, geeks, and open source rebels who are revolutionizing the technology landscape. Search for Command Line Heroes anywhere you listen to podcasts. Hello, everybody in FLOSS world, whatever time and place it happens to be for you. I am Doc Searls. This is FLOSS Weekly. And I am joined by Aaron Newcomb today. You there, Aaron?
I'm here.
There he is.
A little washed out, but I don't know.
I know it is a
fix
kind of a
my
weird
camera.
thing. Like, it's like you've got the Vaseline spread
I think it's
on
the
camera.
light coming in. Yeah, I've got a window over here, and I think it's the light coming in is kind of
ambient
messing
light
up with the webcam. But oh well, that's okay.
The webcam's saying, "Wait a minute, that's all blue. It's kind of got a blue tint to it. We're just gonna
Exactly.
neutralize the whole thing to a kind of gray blue." And your clutter's changed, I think. You could change that a little bit.
Not really.
Which is good.
I wish it had changed. I've got so many projects. Every time I order my stuff and I stick it in that pile back there, and I think, okay, so I'm going to put a little label on this, and someday I'm going to get to it. And that time seems like it never comes, but I'm getting to it slowly but surely.
Yeah. I actually partly cleaned my office this morning, and I found a pile of New Yorker magazines that, like, from the mid-teens, and I used to take these to hospitals and doctors' offices, but those things have been completely cleared out in pandemic time. You can't do that anymore. There's no longer reading material there. You have to just stare at your glowing rectangle instead. So everybody's looking at their phones in the doctors' offices. Anyway, yeah. So you're
I look
still
at
in
old I look at
California?
old Byte magazines on my phone when I'm in the doctor's office.
Yeah, I think I've told you this before because I really want to bring this up because I found this. This is popular electronics from whenever, and there is an ad in here for what I really wanted, which was the there it is, the Altair, the original Altair.
Oh,
is
I'm
that
looking
not extremely
for.
cool? You can't throw this away. I should send it to you. You should use it.
Oh, totally. I'm looking
It'll
for
be
the one
totally
either
at home. Yeah.
Let me know. We'll talk after the show because I'm looking for the one where they introduce the Altair on it for an upcoming video I'm doing on the Apple One. So, and there's like some pre stuff that I do about history and how the Altair came about and all that kind of stuff. Let's talk after the show. I think our guest today is actually into. Yeah, that would be great. I think our guest today is actually into retro computers.
I know,
as
actually,
well,
it's very apropos of our guest today.
Yeah.
So, and we'll get to that as quickly as I can. But first, I need to let you know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Technology Powers X, an original podcast by Dell Technologies. Each episode of Technology Powers X focuses on a different industry and goes behind the scenes to help you understand how technology is reshaping business everywhere. I just love the fact that podcasts are supporting podcasts. This is the coolest thing. A recent episode features researchers who are studying the architecture of the human brain in an effort to develop more versatile AI models. Another episode explores the world of professional esports, featuring behind-the-scenes look at Team Liquid and their star CSGO player, Alij. And one episode talks all about vertical farming and how innovative new tech can change where your food comes from and how this may be the future of sustainably feeding 21st century populations. Technology Powers X is hosted by Danielle Applestone, a hardware engineer and entrepreneur. If you're a pet lover, check out episode 14, Best Partner for Pets. Here is a clip.
Yet today, technology plays a growing role, not just in happy reunions, but as an invaluable tool to America's animal welfare workers.
So search for Technology Powers X anywhere you listen to podcasts and download each episode today. That's Technology Powers X. Download it today. My thanks to Technology Powers X for their support. So on to our guest, Andre Kudra, who I've known from our family's involvement with a lot of the work that he does. And I say our families because we have two techies here, my wife and myself. Andre is a leading figure in the self-sovereign identity movement, which is better known as SSI. He's also deeply into retro computing and the demoscene movements, and has been an information security specialist for this entire millennium. So welcome aboard, Andre. Good to have you here. There you are.
Thank you for having me, Doc.
You're in a wooden
pleasure.
box. Is that a faked up background, or is that the real thing?
Well, this is in fact the real background. I'm in a nice hotel in the Swiss mountains, and this is the fully wooden room type that I booked for this stay, and it looks like a fake background. It's the real one.
It looks like what you got shipped in a little bit, but it looks like you have some room there. So
it's really nice.
So thanks. So. Give us a little background. I think we've had a number of people on talking of SSI before. We've had Brian Bellendorf with Hyperledger, and he goes back much farther than that, all the way back to the founding of Apache, and Kalia Hamlin. I think we may have had Phil Windley on. He's very involved. But this is a constantly changing thing. We actually last week had our twice yearly giant identity workshop, which I co-host or co-organize, which is wrong. I don't organize anything, but I helped start it anyway. But it's turned into the largely SSI thing, and SSI seems to be moving forward rather rapidly with a lot of developers involved in it. So give us maybe the high level and the down in the geek weeds version of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think IIW is such a great opportunity twice a year to get together with thought leaders in the self-sovereign identity movement, basically. Well, I'm usually based in Germany, even though I'm now in Switzerland, and I can assure you this is tremendously picking up here as well. So self-sovereign identity is, even though the term kind of suggests that it's an identity management thing, but it's so much more. It's a digitalization enabler for everything that you want to do secure data exchanges online before specifying an API and an interface. And I think that's the brilliance of it, having this as an enabling technology. It's kind of a decentralized PKI, but I think this doesn't really grasp the whole magnitude what you can do with it.
Yeah, actually, I'd forgotten that one of our earlier guests was Devin Lafredo, who created the term self-sovereign identity and then sort of backed off and did his day job. But it's always been fascinating to me because back when we started IW in 2005, the idea was we called user-centric identity, but the entities that were being user-centric were companies, and the companies were all keeping records on us, and every company has namespaces for every customer, or every consumer, or every supplier, and we've always thought of identity as something that lives in those places. If I have an ID, it's one issued to me by somebody else. But I've always liked the way that the self-sovereign identity movement kind of breaks this into credentials. In other words, if I have a driver's license, really all you need to know is, are you licensed to drive? Not how old I am, what color my eyes are, all those other things that might be in an administrative system. And part of the idea, I think, is to pull us, kind of relieve companies of the responsibility to keep bear the entire responsibility for identity, and rather let identity happen out in the world where individuals have more sovereignty over how they present the credentials. Do I have that? Have that right, or is that moved on to some other meaning at this point?
Well, you're absolutely right. I think this is all about end user empowerment and being in control of the data about you and the flows of the data. And it basically takes the burden away from the organizations to store that data. And kind of, if you look at GDPR or any other data protection regulation, so it basically gives the control of the data and the data itself in the hand of the end users. And obviously, we are kind of stuck with the terminology, so we call it self-sovereign identity. But I think at least also part of the community is not so happy with the term anymore. But this is the one that has been sticking around for years now, and everyone knows it by that name. And with the credential, this is also a term that kind of gives us a grasp that we have secure, trusted attributes that are in our kind of personal digital wallet where we can work with them, but we are definitely in full control of where this data flows. So an organization who wants to look at my data that is about me, that I hold, it has to request it from me, and I can decide if I want to disclose it or not. So that's kind of turning the whole identity paradigm totally on the head and making it for the end user to be completely in control and empowered.
Andre, this how did this get started? I mean, what are the roots of SSI? We've talked a little bit about it. Doc was talking about it, but how long has this been around, and where did it come from, this idea?
Yeah, well, I can at least share my part of the journey. So I'm in this topic since 2015. So we first got into, we are a security company, so Isato is driven by information security topics, and identity and access was always one cornerstone of all our activities. So we, as a part of our innovation management, always looked into things that are the future. And in 2015, the whole kind of blockchain distributed ledger bandwagon kind of started in the information security industry in Germany, and we thought, let's look into this. And then in 2016, I was at a conference in Munich and met a couple of people who basically brought the idea of self-sovereign identity to me, and this later on led to the sovereign endeavor, which basically was one of the pioneers, or is still the pioneer in the self-sovereign identity world. So you basically have a model where you have a distributed ledger, which is kind of your identity network, where your organizations that want to work with SSI and issue credentials basically can act as a certificate authority in the PKI sense, but they can basically formulate the credentials they like. So they can attest to anything to user what they think is necessary. To give you an example, we are using this internally for Isatos to control the access to our internal applications. So all our employees have employee certificates, employee credentials from Isatos, and basically when they have a valid credential, they can access our internal applications. And this is just a small example of what you can do with all that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, the next question I was going to ask, you started to go down that road already, is your company, Isatus.com, is that right? ESATUS, for those that want to look it up.
Thank you.
How does this cross over? I'm assuming this is a commercial endeavor, right? So where's the crossover? Why isn't this just hosted somewhere in the public domain? And why do we need a company set up around it?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. So actually, the whole ecosystem is based on a couple of open source cornerstones. So Doc mentioned that the Hyperledger, Brian Bellendorf's Hyperledger was there already, and Hyperledger, Indy, and Aries are basically the projects that are delivering the underlying fundamental technology for these distributed ledgers to run the identity networks. And a lot of this technology is open source, without which this wouldn't have been possible. So the adoption is ever growing because this is available, and everyone in the world can basically start on a journey with an own Indy-based ledger to create their identity ecosystem, completely afresh from open source. So actually what we are doing, we are providing a value-added service to that, and I come to that in a second. So the ledger as such and the operations obviously is also driven by organizations who see a value in that. And this is a new type of infrastructure, such as a telephone network or mobile telephone network, which gives you the infrastructure to do stuff with it and do telephony on it or other stuff, and basically create value-added services on the top of that infrastructure. And Isato's value proposition is that we solve identity and access management use cases based on the underlying technology. And this is kind of the service package and software package that we deliver. obviously, we need a wallet app for that, which is completely free of charge for everyone to download in the iOS and Android app stores. So we are also continuing to do that. So we are just providing a value-add service on the whole open source stack, which is, basically built from Hyperledger, Indy, and Aries components.
So you talked about Hyperledger, Indy, and Aries. I'm just kind of curious, since I'm not up on Hyperledger as such. What are those projects? What is the difference between those projects? What do they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Hyperledger Indy is kind of the software stack that helps you operate such a network. So it gives you the basic code that you can spin up the identity network, so the distributed ledger. So this is kind of the basic technology that you need. And on top of that, you need a communication layer between the agents. So you have institutional agents for the backend, and you have wallet apps for the end users, and they speak to one another. And they basically run on Hyperledger Aries. And this implements open standards via Decentralized Identity Foundation. We created DITCOM protocol, which basically enables the secure communication between the agents. And if you want to look into that a bit further, so the Trust Over IP Foundation, which is also a Linux Foundation project, was launched last year. And it has a nice model, the so-called dual stack of governance and technology on 4 layers. And basically the baseline fundamental layer is layer 1. And this is utility layer, where you basically create this infrastructure. And this is where Indy resides. And one of the upper layers is the DITCOM protocol layer, where the interaction takes place. And this is the Aries stack, Hyperledger Aries open source model, which basically is the fundament for every wallet app and all the agents out there that communicate securely via the DITCOM protocol.
Interesting. I know there's a few of these projects around. It seems like many of them are being driven out of Europe at this point. Is that because of the stricter regulations versus in the U.S.? I'm just kind of curious. Is there something at the government level that's driving these now? I mean, this is all good. Obviously, it should have happened sooner, probably. But I mean, what's driving it? Is it the changes in government and restrictions there?
Yeah, I think in Europe, and particularly in Germany, where I reside, is we feel a strong urge to move towards a more digital sovereign world, which means that the actors on citizen and organizational and state level can act more independently from outside parties. So be it big tech companies from East and West. So they are feeling the urge to kind of counterbalance what's happening in the world, and they want to basically play a part in that game. So you see that strongly in all the tenders and the calls that are out there from government agencies. So they want to basically re-enable the European ecosystem to do digital stuff more independently. So let's frame it like that. And as part of that, they are also embarking on SSI projects. And we are personally, as Isatos, are very deeply involved in 2 particular things. So one is a co-funded project by the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs in Germany. It's called ID Union. And this is basically also a utility project. So we are creating a Hyperledger Indy network, but also with more than 35 partners creating use cases in this self-sovereign identity space with this organization in the next 3 years. So the funding that comes from the Federal Ministry is 15 million. We have more than 15 core partners, and an ever-growing list of associated partners who want to be part of the journey and want to contribute and work with this. This is one thing where we're active in, but also if you look at what's happening at the top level from a government perspective in Germany, last December, Chancellor Merkel invited around 20 C-level executives from large-scale organizations in Germany to, I call it an identity summit. So they wanted to talk about digital identity and the future of digital identity in Germany and Europe overall. And they got together and said, this is a great idea to do something with self-sovereign identity and the open source technology stack. And basically, right after this meeting, they ramped up a pilot initiative, which is running full steam. And we will hear a lot more about this in the open within this month. So stay tuned. Lots of cool stuff is happening in Germany on the highest government levels, which we wouldn't have expected a year back, but this just happened, and we are all very, very excited and motivated to move this forward.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations on that. That's awesome. What's the status with the general public? I mean, I know, for example, that I use for work. Obviously, I have identity tools that I use to validate, either through two-level authentication or what have you, my identity to when I'm signing into my applications. But this is really a lot, like you said, it has a lot of different things that are baked into this platform. But like in terms of protecting my data, my personal data, I'm not really using any kind of tool on my phone or something to give access to other companies. Is this being rolled out at all among the general public in Germany?
Yeah, I think we are trying to get to this breakthrough we are all hoping for. As I said, we are working in the space since 2015, 2016, and we have always hoped that this will kind of lead to a faster adoption. But obviously, as this is such a fundamental infrastructural change that we are desiring, I think it needed time. And we started with writing lots of papers, going to conferences, talking about it and promoting it. And then since 2 years, the technology matured, and we said we also wanted to do our part and develop a tool suite that you can use for more. And as we have now the momentum that we see in Germany, which clearly mandates more broad use cases which citizens can use basically every day with ID Union and the other project, I think we will soon see more adoption in the open. So, at this point, actually, I don't know how much productive use cases out there with a huge magnitude of users, but I can assure you we are ready from a technology perspective to scale this very, very widely.
So I have I'm wondering if you could unpack something for us around distributed ledgers and blockchains. You were mentioning a distributed ledger with Hyperledger Indy, and for those of you just listening and not watching, that's INDY. Does SSI require distributed ledgers or blockchains, or is it more open and flexible than that as a category?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I think this was one of the key topics that were discussed in the last Internet Identity workshop. So there's actually, I think there is different streams in the global SSI community. So I'm one of the strong believers that we need the ledger for a variety of things, and I can dive a little bit deeper into that. So there may be others, I know there are others who are saying, well, basically we can use self-issued credentials, or the organizations can issue credentials without any ledger. I think there are certain drawbacks to that, and we can look at those. But actually, you could even issue in the PKI sense credentials from organizations directly with cryptographic assurance. And let's look at why do we need the ledger. So I think there is some clear advantages on having the ledger, because you have a place which is completely open for everyone to look at, and the ledger is kind of permissioned because the nodes are permissioned. So the operators have to be permissioned, and transactors on the network have to be permissioned, but the network is completely open for reading. And this has a couple of benefits. So we can publish the public DIDs, so the identifiers of organizations on the network, and can refer to them. So they are widely in the open, and we can refer to them and see who has created this public DID. And we can publish credential schemas and verifiable credential definitions on the ledger for reference and for also broad browsing by others, because you don't need to reinvent the schema that another one that has invented. And you can just leverage existing schemas that are out there, and you don't have to basically create them on their own if they fit your needs. And the third, and I think the fourth, actually, schemas and credential definitions are two things that are written. The fourth is we have a reference point for registering revocations. So actually, what's the great benefit of the ledger is we have a totally anonymized way of revoking credentials. And in the time of when someone proves certain attributes out of these credentials, the verifier can validate that the credential has not been revoked in the meantime without having to reach out to the issuer. And I think this is a great advantage, because we can do a couple of things in this proofing time. So we can validate the credential is from the issuer, which I expect, which is visible on the public ledger. It has not been tampered with a cryptographic assurance, and we can, in fact, be certain it hasn't been revoked. Otherwise, the proof wouldn't be happening. So I think if we find ways of solving all these kind of use cases without ledgers, I'm happy. But I think at this point, we, with our proposition, really want the ledgers to be happening, because then everything that the community from a user perspective needs and wants gets what they want. And to be very honest with you, even though I very much appreciate, and I'm deeply surprised of the breadth and depth of the discussion at events like IIW, I think this is kind of a very nerdy and sometimes even philosophical debate, which is interesting if you're into the topic, but this probably would shy away business decision takers. They would basically get back to us and tell us, look, guys, grow up. We can talk in 5 years when you've sorted all the stuff. But I'm very certain that in 5 years, all the great minds will discuss still the topics and do new stuff and discuss new things, and we haven't made it happen. So I'm more on the doing and making it happen side.
And you're doing a good job, I know. A question about a couple of things you brought up that listeners might need need expanded a bit. One was DIDs, that's DID, and DIDCOM. Can you want to explain those two things for us and how they fit in with SSI?
Yeah, so I think one of the fundamental things that everyone believed was key and was necessary is the DIDs. This is a decentralized identifier, and this is kind of your connecting point to others in the self-sovereign identity paradigm. And so let's look at who has DIDs. So basically, everything and everyone has a DID. But sometimes, or in most cases, it's probably not publicly revealed. So every time you want to have an interaction between two parties, they basically create a new DID and create a peer-to-peer connection via the DIDCOM protocol for information exchange. So basically, everyone who works with a self-sovereign identity at the end will have dozens or even hundreds of DIDs, but they all culminate in his or her wallet to basically build the connections to the other parties they want to connect with. So basically, you create DIDs every time you build a new connection, and you create a peer-to-peer connection with a pairwise DID connection. And only in that case where this is permissible, we will have public DIDs. And public DIDs are belonging to organizations for which they can basically use a ledger to publish them, and by which they can be recognized and be re-identified. And why do we only do this for organizations? It's mainly for data protection reasons, because in the end, if you would have a DID of a private person, of a natural person on a ledger, and in Germany or Europe, you would want to invoke your right to be forgotten, because this is, even though it's a pseudonymous identifier, it couldn't be done because we obviously have ledger immutability. And for organizations, this is not so much of a problem, but for natural persons, it would be. So we wouldn't persist this DIDs of people on the ledger. That's the reason why they always remain basically anonymous and do peerwise DID connections with their wallet app, which is only available to themselves and not publicly visible by anyone else. That's kind of the DID story. Yeah. And DIDCOM is the protocol to allow the connection. Sorry, yeah.
Oh no, yeah, I forgot about DidCom. So it's just funny because Doc and I were just chatting in our little chat app here that as you're talking, it sounds to both of us like the early days of networking, and all the RFC stuff that was going on and discussions that were happening around how do we authenticate, how do we make this happen, what's the best protocols or Ethernet or token ring, and different companies pushing different standards and stuff. And I don't know, it just sounds very, very similar to those early discussions in the early days of networking. We do have a question here from the chat room, sort of from the chat room, but via Jonathan Bennett, who's in the chat room. So I guess it is from the chat room.
He's one of our co-hosts.
He's also one of our co-hosts on the show, but he wants to know, and this is something I was interested in too, in terms of security. So he says, how does an individual prove that they are the person connecting to the digital identity? How hard would it be to spoof the credentials in this circumstance and say, oh yeah, of course, Google, I give you access to all of my personal information, for example?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and we have had very intense discussions in the past month regarding this exact fact. So what's going to be happening, obviously, is we will have some kind of more valuable credentials, which kind of are the root of your identity. And this all basically boils down of the root of trust we have to create. And then we will be able to spawn some kind of a web of trust kind of mode. But we have to have some kind of initial anchor point for a trustworthy digital identity. So this is kind of also in the making. And particularly in Germany and Europe, we have something called eIDAS regulation, which is the kind of digital identity regulation that already exists in the EU, which basically mandates certain things to happen to have a state-proof digital identity. And as this was such a cumbersome process, this has been around for 10 years in Germany, and basically no one was using it. And now we are finding a way of basically transporting the data that is in this state-attested digital identity card, which we have. It's a physical card, and we can basically port this data in a secure and trustworthy manner to a verifiable credential. And based on this, we can basically spawn the ecosystem. So if you have the necessity to identify the person, that it's really the person, you would first ask for this kind of state-registered or state-proven data set. So if you want to create a bank account or anything like that, it obviously requires certain KYC and AML regulations to be fulfilled. So if you request this proof of identity first, then actually we can basically do more stuff without considering the lesser value credentials, basically, which only are issued to you on certain use cases. So to basically make it a little bit more tangible, so actually we would need some kind of mechanism to prove at the time of the creation of your credential that you are you, and basically prohibit that this credential, which is kind of a state-issued credential, can be transported to anyone else. So this boils down to ring fencing of the wallet, security of the wallet on your smart device, and also device binding of these credentials. So this is basically where it boils down to have this strong security mechanisms and strong identity proofing in the beginning. And obviously, then you also have the responsibility to not hand your smartphone away with all your digital life on it, which is obviously something you wouldn't want to do anyways, at least I hope.
There's so many other questions. But first, I have to let you know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is also brought to you by Command Line Heroes. Command Line Heroes is a podcast that shares with you the epic true tales of developers, programmers, hackers, geeks, and open source rebels who have and still are revolutionizing the technology landscape. And Season 7 is out now. Season 7 of Command Line Heroes explores a pivotal year, 1995. It was the start of the dot-com boom, but a lot of things had to come together for the internet to succeed. Meet the internet class of 95. For example, long before you could hop on GoDaddy and grab a domain name, there was a woman you would have to call. Elizabeth Feinler was the keeper of all domains. Episode 1 of the season features a conversation with the woman herself, now in her 90s, about how she managed the internet and how her team needed to create the DNS. 95 was also the year that ISPs became the dominant gateway to what we called then the information superhighway. But how do we go from ARPANET all the way to that? It turns out none of it would have happened without a team of intrepid engineers at the University of Michigan and a network they built called the NSFNet. Web design took a while to become a career, but it got a big boost in 95 when the Batman Forever website launched to promote the movie. It showed people what was possible on the web. This episode features pioneers like Jeffrey Zeldman, the godfather of web design, who recounts the shift that forever changed the face of the web. A new search engine launched in 95 that took the world by storm. It had a number of firsts: a fast and advanced web crawler, whole-page translation from a number of different languages to English, and something called Flypaper. Hear how Alta Vista, I remember that very well, was the first search engine for the 21st century. 95 was a pivot point, the moment when the internet went from an academic curiosity to a global phenomenon. Command Line Heroes is hosted by developer and podcaster Suran Yitbarek. I got a sneak preview of Season 7, and it really gives some deep insight into the history behind the technology and who is in part of it. And I also dig, again, that podcaster supporting podcast. So check out all of the incredible stories from Season 7 today. Search for Command Line Heroes anywhere you listen to podcasts. That's Command Line Heroes. Download it today. Our thanks to Command Line Heroes for their support. So, boy, these things are backing up. One quick question I have is, who's in what business here? And I'm especially wondering about the verifier role. Is there a business out there that's going to grow called, SSI verifiers? What is that exactly as an entity?
This can be basically anyone who sees the value in looking at credentials and trusted data. So I think this is something where we still have to also explore what the roles are of certain people and entities in this whole game. So it always boils down to the trust triangle of issuer, holder, and verifier. And basically, any one of these can have special interest in having the credentials and looking at the data. And the verifiers basically can benefit from self-issued credentials. So they basically are the same in the same role or the different role in the same entity. So as Isato is issuing their own credentials to their employees and looking at them again to give access to data. But the verifiers could also use credentials that are coming from other parties to kind of do their access control or their kind of discounts if you're a certain club member or something like that. So basically the verifier has to understand that there is someone else out there who may have produced a data set that a holder has that he can use. So let's do a tangible example. So let's say ABC Bank is a large-scale bank and works with 2,000 different contractors and has 30,000 internal employees. So usually they have a huge hassle of identifying everyone rightly and giving the right person the right access at the right time. And they even have a threefold identity and access management challenge. So they have to manage their internal employees, the 30,000, then the 2,000 contractors, and also their customer population. And this is all completely different, dislocated processes. So they could say, we do this for internals, which is a no-brainer, as the same thing that we are doing at the Isato AG. And we actually could do this also for the externals. So if Isato was a contractor company for this ABC Bank, they could say, well, if I trust these Isato guys, they are our contract party. So if they want to access certain systems of ours, which are eligible for external persons to access, we just look at their credentials that they have issued and look if they have employees that are working on our projects. So they basically could just look at the data that someone else, Isato, has issued and determine, well, these guys are good for accessing certain data. And the same could go for the customers as well. So basically, you as a verifying party would basically have to know what kind of trusted issuers you have to understand how you can twist your business model or your internal processes based on externally issued data that you can look at. I hope this clarifies a little bit the interesting space of SSI. So obviously we can do lots of stuff if we issue credentials ourselves, but use them again ourselves. But it gets even more interesting if we look at data sets that are coming from elsewhere that we can use for internal decisions. So I think this still has to sink in. This methodology has to sink in so that people understand there will be trusted data that a person has. He can bring to me, and we can determine stuff we want to do with this, either in our business process or in decision taking or in access control. So these are kind of examples that I have. So being a verifier is more like, what can SSI do for me, for my processes and my business model?
So I have a question about how this starts working fluidly in the world. And I know there are wallets that are issued by a number of companies, and for that matter, maybe nonprofits too. And they're substitutable. I mean, very much like your own personal wallet is substitutable. But the fantasy I have about this is that because SSI is predicated on the notion that you're only going to share on a need-to-know basis the minimum data that's required in order to move forward. I bought a ticket for this concert. I want to get in. I have a license to drive. I have a library card. We're used to thinking of those in terms of cards. We're used to thinking of them in terms of things that we carry around that in our wallets. Or I have a friend who has a key ring of little fobs that you can present with a QR or a barcode for all the different loyalty programs that he's involved in, because he wants discounts everywhere. I see us moving past that to something where we're literally, we have a phone, or we're carrying something that is our portfolio of verifiable credentials that are heard selectively on the receiving side, and what I would hope would be an automated way. So it isn't that we have to whip out our wallet and take a rectangle out of a wallet, a physical wallet or a virtual wallet, and present that, but something far less labor intensive than that. And where I want to go with that question, though, is like, let's say I'm here in Santa Barbara. Right now I have a library card. It's expired, I guess. It's in a drawer here. I want to renew that. We can go to libraries again pretty soon now that we're let out of our cages. So I get the library card. I can self-issue a credential on that. I could maybe take a note to myself that I got this. Maybe the note sends something to the library that tells them to issue me a verifiable credential so that the next time I need the card, I'll use it, except it's not a card anymore. It's just this way in, as it were, or way past a threshold. And so I'm wondering about how this starts to play out in the world, because I suspect it's not going to be in an especially physical way. It's going to be part of the fluid way that we interact with things, but we'll have confidence that we are disclosing in a minimal and cryptographically contained way that we can trust. Is that close to right in some way?
That's absolutely right. And I think the convenience and usability of this whole package is yet not at the level where we need it. So basically, having people scanning QR codes and invoking the connections and all this stuff, it doesn't feel natural at this stage. But I think we can get there. And for the privacy preserving mode, actually, in fact, this is baked into the technology. I think we didn't stress this enough. So if you have a credential that holds 15 different attributes, in no way you have to present all the 15 attributes every time. So you can have selective disclosure, and if it's only needed that you present your last name out of your identity card, then you don't have to disclose everything else that's on the credential. And even if you have certain things, like you want to do an age check, and there's no necessity to disclose your birth date to in fact know if you're above 21 or not. So you can just ask the question, is the person above 21 or not? And you get a yes/no response. This is all baked into the technology. But the starting off of the usability, I think this is key because today, everything is still a little bit too cumbersome. I totally agree with you. And we have to sort out this usability challenge and make it much more fluid and naturally feeling for everyone to use it. Otherwise, I think the adoption will not be quick enough. And we obviously have to understand the requirements of people who don't have or don't want a smartphone. So I think we have to take this into account and facilitate also these communities which are not totally into tech and don't want to use the technology everywhere in their lives. So it has to just feel more natural and not be intrusive in any way.
I think, too, that this is another area where government can play a role. And I know that at least in the United States, people get a little touchy when, we talk about the idea of a national ID. I mean, it still boggles my mind that we in the United States still use Social Security numbers, which is a unique number for most people that live in the United States, as a means of identification when that is so easily found out via dumpster diving or just a little bit of looking into somebody's history. You can usually come up with a Social Security number, and then identity theft becomes rampant, right? So it seems like I think this might be a good way to start a project around not only protecting data and privacy, but also as a means for identity that's more in the user's control. I mean, that has to be part of it as well, the whole identity theft issue, right?
I totally agree. And I think this is exactly the point why we are not having one DID where you can connect to all the time. So you create a new one. It's like a throwaway phone number that you use for every single person you ever met. And that's kind of the beauty of it, that you don't have this one correlating item which identifies you, which is like a Social Security number, which basically boils down to everything that you do where you have to use it. So this is kind of a key item that is baked in SSI from the start. So this is kind of so this is also a point of where you can identify if someone wants to do some SSI washing of their technology. If they have a correlating identifier, then actually this is not in the true sense of SSI. And maybe this is a good point to refer to the 12 principles of self-sovereign identity that the global SSI community has produced, and this effort was convened by the Sovereign Foundation, and it's you can look it up on their website. So I think this is if you want to do the vetting, if you're talking to true SSI guys, look at these 12 principles. And for identity theft, actually, no one can impersonate you with anything that you. Well, basically, you have the wallet under control, so someone would completely hijack your wallet and basically get hold of your cryptographically and biometrically, ideally secured wallet app. And obviously, this is a challenge for us as a wallet developing community as well, to have the security level in place and also allow you to have backups, synchronization methods, and also remote wiping of the devices to protect your digital identity, which obviously gets more valuable with the data that you put together about yourself in your digital wallet.
Great. That's awesome. You mentioned sovereign.org. I think that's SOVRIN.org, and there's a link there to the principles of SSI. It sounds like that would be great reading for people, for anyone that's listening to this that is intrigued at all, or maybe new to the subject, as I am, certainly. Sounds like that would be a great place for people to go to learn more about SSI and, the important components that need to be in place to make SSI happen. Okay, I want to change topics here because there's a question from the chat, and then there's another question that I have for you that we were talking about as we were getting ready to start the show. So let's go to the chat first. People on the chat are loving your sweatshirt, actually. I assume that's a company sweatshirt, but I think it's pretty awesome. And they want to know where to get one. Are you selling these sweatshirts?
Well, we never had that question, but we just did a brand relaunch with a new logo. So basically every employee got one of these shirts and also T-shirts. So if anyone really wants one, just shout out. We'll find a way.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. There you go. Chat room. It pays to be in the chat room, folks. And we do appreciate everyone that jumps in and chimes in and asks questions because it helps us out as well. Another question is demoscene. So we talked about a little bit in the pre-show about our love for retro computers, and of course, demoscene was huge. I think it was bigger definitely in Europe than it was in the States back in the day. But you're into the demoscene a little bit, right?
Oh yes, I am. I try to make myself useful in a variety of ways. So actually, probably it's a point to first outline a bit what that is. It's kind of an underground subculture community of people who love to produce digital pieces of art, and they want to basically show and demonstrate their coding skills with what they call demos. So you create an audio-visual piece of art, so an animation or still or just music, based on coding mostly, and you enter it into a competition, abbreviated as Compo, at a demo party. And you basically, everyone has the right to vote what is the best demo that was presented in a certain category. So this is kind of gets back to the cracker culture of the 80s when the first home computers basically entered the markets and basically brought the digitalization in the first instance to homes, and people got there, and this was very big in Germany and all over Europe. So these cracking groups basically removed the copy protection and put their signatures up front. They called it a crackthrow, a little intro, which basically boasts that they were the first to actually have removed the copy protection. And this whole underground culture evolved into a completely legal and copyright-friendly community called the demoscene, where it just now creates these pieces of digital art to basically demonstrate skill on a variety of different platforms. So this is very, very big, and there are lots of parties usually. Obviously not these times, so everything has now moved to virtual mode. But they are very active on a variety of platforms. C64 is a big one. Amiga in all its iterations. Also Archimedes technology, Atari, and basically all these kind of fancy things that you can imagine, up to the newest top-notch PC classes where you don't have any restrictions. And this is kind of a culture that has evolved since the 80s and is now being recognized as the first digital culture by UNESCO in 2 countries. So just recently, the UNESCO has recognized the demoscene in Germany, intangible cultural heritage. And the first one where this happened was Finland. And we are entertaining as a community a huge project, a global project, to get more countries listed on the UNESCO. And this project is called Art of Coding. We may want to add the URL also to the links later on. And we are basically rallying the demoscene people all over the world to put out these applications to UNESCO to be globally recognized as intangible cultural heritage. So this is such a cool project. When I heard about this from the initiators 2 years back, I said, I want to be part of it. Even though I probably, that's the website. Thanks for showing it. So the idea is basically to get this on the list of UNESCO as the first digital culture, truly digital culture on the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritages list. And we already succeeded with the 2 countries, and now everywhere people are popping up and telling, look, let's work on this. We want to do this locally in our country as well. And I can invite everyone to look at these activities. It's such a cool community. And also going back to open source, actually, this was kind of a more closed shop community in the early days. But nowadays, so people proudly publish their code because they want to help bring new talent to the community and show how they did this, particularly in size coding, where you squeeze into 256 bytes a whole world of things that you could have never imagined. So people are interested in seeing the math behind that and the assembler code and all that. So it's very open. It's very interesting to dive into that and get people up to speed. And this is both old school technology like Commodore, old school hardware, but also top-notch PC class. So it's a wide variety, and it holds points for everyone. So I love it, and I hope to see the point in time again when we can get to the physical parties again.
Yeah, people that are old enough to remember those days will remember some of that stuff that came out. And it really has to do with pushing the envelope in a lot of ways, right? So, how do you get graphics on a C64 that were never intended to be on a C64, or music on a C64 that you just can't even believe? So, and it was a bit of a competition back in the day too, wasn't it? A lot of it was like, oh, you made wavy text, I got to figure out how to make wavy text. Everybody seems like they had wavy text back in those days.
Absolutely, and this is kind of the spirit this community is in, and I think we still see in more modern coders. So you just want to do stuff yourself. So in these days where people never had seen a computer and never could have imagined they have it in their homes. So they got into the computers in the 80s and basically built stuff on their own because they could do it and they wanted to explore. And this is still the spirit in the demo scene where you still see so many new productions coming out for this old hardware, and also software is coming out that you can use, like games for C64 and Amiga and all these other platforms are basically coming out every month. So this is such a vivid and vibrant community, and I think it has now the chance of getting more recognition also with this UNESCO projects. And obviously, I'm much into hardware preservation. So I want to, if we ever get the chance of getting funding grants from these activities, I want to get myself involved more in the preservation of hardware so that we can preserve this technology for future generations so that they can experience these demo coding and games that of the early days still in the next 100 years or more on the real hardware. So this is kind of my part in it, and I try to promote the activities of this Art of Coding initiative and also the community in the parties wherever I can. And it's just an invitation. I think in the US it's not so big anymore. There was this one demo scene party. It's called Synchrony. It basically happened last time in a train, I think from somewhere in the US to Canada. But the demo scene community in the US is not so big anymore, unfortunately, I think. But in Europe and particularly also Eastern and Northern Europe, it's big and there's lots of parties. So if you have ever the chance to come, you should go to something like Assembly in Finland or to Revision in Germany in Saarbrücken. This is just hilarious. As a coder, you'll love it.
I'd love to go to that. I know Doc wants to jump in here, but just quickly, do you have a favorite classic demo? Is there one or some developer in particular that jumps out to you as one of your favorites? Because I want to go look some of this stuff up.
Well, I would point you to one particular thing that I've run into in the last year. It's a PC demo. It's a 256 byte demo. It's called Memories by a guy called Helmut. It's spelled HELLMOOD, so Helmut. And he has managed to squeeze unbelievable things into this 256 bytes, which is kind of his specialty. So I'm always a big fan of this size coding thing, where big stuff happens in small code. So I would like to point you to that. And obviously, if you want to look at more elaborate things, which are not based on, that's thanks for showing the website on the stream. So if you want to look at more elaborate things, always a good point to look at is Farblausch. So they are kind of the old school guys who basically building great demos for many, many years now. And also demo groups like TRSI, who are in the game for, I don't know, more than 30 years. So just look it up. So I can direct you to two websites which actually host all the knowledge about the demo scene and the productions. One is called POUET. It's a POUET.net.com. I have to look myself. I'd give that a second. I think it's POUET.net. And the other one is demozoo.org. So if you want to look into demos, you look at these sites, and you can look at these parties like revision and assembly, and you get basically also the voting results. Yeah, that's thanks for showing POUET in the stream. That's actually the site where you want to look at the stuff, and you can also watch video recordings on the usual channels where you can basically see the recordings of the demos. Yeah, that's Outline Demo Party is basically happening next weekend in the Netherlands. And yes, I think the biggest one where the community is also very, very proud of is Revision in Germany. Big one, more than the 1,000 people being there physically and a couple of thousand in the stream. And in Finland, the assembly is happening twice a year, but assembly has moved to also an esports event. So in one of the assemblies every year, they have a big demo scene branch as well. But yes, I think these are the biggest things that are happening. And I think as a coder and someone who's into digital art, you'll absolutely love it.
Holy cow, this is crazy. I'm just watching the Memories demo on YouTube. How do you fit that into 256 bytes? My mind is blown. Now, this isn't fancy, right? But as someone who's done a little bit of development, it has music. It has like, I got to go look at the code now. This is amazing.
Yeah, it's open. Wow. You can look it up. Yeah, you can see the math behind it. Yeah.
It doesn't look fancy
stuff, and we're coming up on the end of our hour. I have a possibly useless question because I think it's self-answering, but when I look around at the junk that I still have, most of it is not early stuff. It's middle-aged stuff where, the operating systems came from companies that have abandoned those things. And I know I can run Linux on some of these things, but if I want to sort of replicate what you could do with a Windows box and running 95 or 98 or something, or a Mac box from the same era, unless you're just running it, off the net and just on its own thing. Is this kind of a lost period in history? Are we going to care? I don't know. I hold on to these things, though. There they are.
I think you should. So I think there's lots of people who have lived through these times of the early days of computing, and many fancy it. And there's lots of great preservation projects already going on. So I think we have at least a solid group of people who will preserve this going forward. And I think there's also getting more collections out in the open where you can experience that, which are usually very, very approachable. So it's not just showing it in a closed behind glass kind of situation. You can work with this. I'm also part of a local museum in the Frankfurt area. It's called Digital Retro Park. So they are always eager to demonstrate the technology and show it to everyone. So I think this is kind of a preservation approach that is not like this historic ancient museum type of style, but really approachable, and you can work with it. And I think this is just a great way also to get in touch with computing, because it's understandable computers. It's not so cluttered architectures as we are having them today, basically.
Yeah, or find a group. If someone else is listening and they have a a collection of stuff, and they're like, I just can't keep this in the garage anymore, whatever, I got to get rid of it. Find a local group of enthusiasts. We have one that we're always taking donations from folks for some of that old stuff, and we'll fix it up and install the original operating system and get it running, and then bring it to an event, like a Maker Faire or something, and show it off so that kids and adults can experience what it was like.
So we are at our closing moments here, and I this is so interesting, and in so many ways. We had two gigantic topics, and we'll have to have you back. Just a couple questions before we go. I've already covered the blockchain one, which is one we always ask. But I'd like to ask if there's anything we haven't asked, but I think we're out of time. So there's one question we ask everybody, though, which is, what is your favorite text editor and scripting language? That's a geeky question. You maybe.
Yeah, text editor would actually be Notepad++, which I use basically daily. And scripting language, I think, would be Python.
That seems to be our winner overall. Listen, it has just been fabulous having you on the show, Andre. We'll have to have you back because things are going to change, and I'm sure you'll have good things to say about SSI and about the demo scene and the rest of it. But in the meantime, thanks so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure. Looking forward to be back if you want to have me again.
Oh, we do. So, Aaron, how was that for you, man? That was a good one.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, right? I mean, both topics, they probably could have been shows on their own, I think, but they were both really, really good. The privacy and security, of course, are super relevant, more so every day, it seems like. And, of course, the demo scene is right up my alley, with what I do for my YouTube channel. So, I think it's super interesting. I do hope that this catches on. I know people are concerned. It's going to feel like they're giving control to someone else, even though the whole goal is to keep control yourself. You still, I've got to download an app. Maybe somebody's, I think we're just conditioned to think that way. But a lot more work needs to be done here. And I think it needs to be... there needs to be some good PR, because I don't think the common citizen, if you will understand what this means and what it is. So I think there's an opportunity here for people to do some really good PR and let people know in simple ways how it works, why it's important, and why everybody needs to get on board.
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching this space for the last, at least since 2015. As Andre said, he's been around. And in my case, my wife is also very involved. She was on the Sovereign Foundation, was very involved in that. I got to know Andre through that connection. And it's still early with this thing. And the good thing with it is that I've just seen so many initiatives come and go that started as like somebody's great idea, a bunch of people work on it, and then it kind of fades away over here. This is, like P3P, for example, something like that. Like, great idea, but it didn't happen. This is an idea that's happening. There are a lot of companies or governments. He mentioned, I think it ran on the scroll, but British Columbia has been doing some stuff with that. There are a number of provinces in Canada, states in the U.S. Credit unions in the U.S. are very involved with this. I think there are a number of not just companies, but open source developers as well that are looking and seeing this doesn't fit. It really doesn't fit in the default system we've had since 95, mentioning 95 with one of our sponsors, that you need to be in this sort of cookie server client world in order to do everything, in which case your identity is with a bunch of servers. And it's really not. Your identity is whatever you present from your wallet, whatever form that takes, in a way that you control. And the idea that DIDs are some sort of kind of burners in a way. I mean, you don't need, they're just the convenience of the moment, and what else do you need to know? I mean, my favorite experience with that is that, being behind a guy named Mike at a Starbucks, and because so many guys are named Mike, he says his name is Clive, doesn't matter. It's all you need to know at the other end, right? Identity could be that simple, I think. So this is great. I think we have to move on. So this has been over an hour. So thank you, everybody, very much. This has been FLOSS Weekly. Next week we have Stephen Von Nichols on. He's one of the great reporters on the topic of open source and the rest of it. He's been there since before the beginning, and he still has a job in it, which I don't beyond this. So hats off to him.
I love his articles. He's great.
Yeah, he's always great. He's always solid. He gets scoops too. I mean, he knows his stuff, and he can kick tires. He's great. So he's scheduled for next week. Schedule doesn't always do what we think it's going to do, but I'm pretty sure he's punctual and he'll be on. So thanks so much for being with us for another hour of this. I'm Doc Searls. This is FLOSS Weekly, and we will see you next week.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that podcast episode. If you would like to check out more about tech news, then you should check out Tech News Weekly with me, Micah Sargent, my co-host Jason Howell, where we interview the people making and breaking the tech news every week.